South and Finsbury and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Baroness Thérèse Coffey, Conservative peer, former Deputy Prime Minister. Stephen Flynn, SNP leader in Westminster and MP for Aberdeen South. And George Parker, political editor of the Financial Times. They're here to take your calls 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player or the brand new LBC app.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, a former chief economic advisor to the Treasury's told LBC Britain's increased long-term borrowing costs shouldn't be a trigger for great alarm. Gilt yields have surged to a 27-year high, increasing pressure on the Chancellor ahead of the autumn budget. Lord Terry Burns says Europe as a whole is suffering from slow growth.
We all have now these very high debt ratios because we've had three major events which have caused governments to spend very heavily, and there hasn't been an opportunity yet to correct that. We had the financial crisis, we had COVID, we've had the energy crisis. The important thing is to get a grip and for people to see that there is a plan.
An ex-prisoner has been jailed for at least 45 years after murdering a prison officer who exposed his relationship with another guard. Lenny Scott was shot dead outside a gym in Lancashire last year in a revenge attack by Elias Morgan. Epping Council's been refused permission to appeal a ruling that asylum seekers can continue to be housed at a hotel in the town. The authority in Essex saw its injunction overturned last week. And a likely 2-year process to dismantle Grenfell Tower is beginning this week. A fire at the block killed 72 people in June 2017. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 79 points at 91.16. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.14. LBC weather turning drier tonight with a few isolated showers. Heavy rain moving across southern and central areas later. Lows of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Good evening. 3 minutes past 8 is the time here on LBC. It's Cross Question until 9 o'clock. Our panel tonight, on my right, Dame Emily Thornberry, Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Next to her is George Parker, political editor of the Financial Times. To my left, Baroness Thérèse Coffey, Conservative peer, former Deputy Prime Minister. And next to her, Stephen Flynn, SNP leader in Westminster and MP for Aberdeen South. You know why they're here. They know why they're here, to answer your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number and you can text 84850. And of course you can watch us on Global Player and the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first question. It's Nicholas in Windsor. Hello, Nicholas.
Good evening, Ian. How are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to ask?
I'd like to ask the panel, the next general election will be in 2026, and it'll be one based on the economy.
I think it's more likely to be 28 or 29.
No, I fear that Keir Starmer is now in a very forlorn position, that the gilt yields are at the same level as they were under Liz Truss, and that we're fast pushing ourselves into recession and potentially an IMF bailout. And hence why I believe that 2026 will be the next general election.
Right. So what's your question?
My question is, why don't any of the political parties, including the Green Party, talk about introducing wealth taxes, but also, in turn, reducing tax on the working class, i.e. through income tax?
Stephen Flynn.
Well, I'm not expecting a general election next year, much as I am frustrated with the Prime Minister. Look, I've got a slightly different take on this because in Scotland we've introduced progressive taxation and we've changed the tax bands ever so slightly so that those who earn more pay more. It's managed to raise in excess of £1 billion, which we've been able to put into public services, primarily the NHS to help deal with the backlogs. That was something which wasn't universally popular. There was people who were sceptical about it, but I certainly think that if Rachel Reeves had her time back, she'd be looking northward and looking at the changes we've made and the manner in which we've been able to fund our public services with a little bit of envy in comparison to the disaster that she's made of things since she walked into number 11.
But if you're going to get the economy firing, raising any taxes is not the way to do it, is it?
To get the economy firing, what the government should be doing, and I hate to be a little bit boring in this regard, is it should be seeking to renew and rebuild its relationship with the European Union. It should be looking to growth industries, and those growth industries are going to be powered primarily by Scotland's energy resource. We should be looking at data centres, at AI, at renewable energy, how we transform the way in which our society works and bring forward the opportunity to build the technology of tomorrow. We haven't done that in the UK for so long, and it's one of the great frustrations that I have living in Scotland, seeing the potential and resource that we have and knowing that we could do so much better if we had control of these things for ourselves.
Thérèse.
Well, just over a decade ago, actually, the Conservative and Lib Dems and coalition actually gave the lowest income people the biggest tax cut ever by shifting the threshold for paying tax in the first place up to eventually over £12,000. And in the time the Conservatives were in charge, the richest 1% ended up paying, I think, ultimately over 30% of income tax generated. So there's no doubt in the statistics, the actual income inequality fell. That said, I'm very conscious that people with the challenges of inflation felt that the cost of living has been and was extraordinarily high. Combination of factors or several factors that happen with that. But I think the focus has to be continuously on what it is that government can do to help people with that cost of living challenge, as well as continuing to try and make the most of every single pound it puts into public services, whether that's the NHS, whether that's the police, and all these other things, to make sure that, frankly, people get the value for money and the productivity that they deserve.
But do you think that Rachel Reeves might well look at imposing some sort of extra taxes? I mean, she's promised she's not going to put income tax up, but there are taxes that the better off pay more than the less well off. So I think Nicholas's point there is, should she do that, put taxes up on the wealthy to reduce taxes on what she would call working people?
Well, regrettably, I think she will end up putting taxes again on businesses. That's the widest spread of how they can try and make some of these difficult decisions that they've got to do. At the end of the day, they inherited a particular financial situation where inflation was quite low. We're seeing
A mess
and guilt. I'm not going to say a mess. I actually think there are definitely challenges in that post-COVID era where a lot of money went into supporting people in this country. But nevertheless, I don't think the decisions that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have made early on have helped. And we're seeing that with regrettably increasing unemployment and the like.
But you say she's inevitably going to put taxes on business. Were you a member of a cabinet that did exactly that, putting corporation tax up?
Well, this was part of the plan to recover the hundreds of billions of pounds that went in to keep, understandably, business and households going during that time. And it was all up front. It was said that this would need to be recovered, and it was recovered. But ultimately, I think what we're seeing now is a massive expansion, and business is at risk of contracting.
OK. Emily Thornberry.
I think that the fiscal strategy of the government has been endorsed by the IMF. We've had 5 cuts in interest rates. We've got 380,000 new jobs. There's a huge amount of private investment that's coming into the UK that wasn't happening before. But these things take time. I think that it's clear that we need to start paying down the debt, and we have to remember that this government inherited the worst debt levels like ever, the highest taxes like ever, and public services that were on their knees. So it's difficult, and it takes a while. And I do appreciate that people voted Labour. No, people voted Labour, and they thought, we voted Labour, why isn't everything better? And it does take time. And I think that, the government does, and I think fair-minded people do know that. They do know that the Labour government needs to have a bit more than a year to turn around 14 years of failure of the Tories. And so, we need to make sure that we are going for growth. And this is kind of absolutely what the priority is, and the changes that have been made over the last couple of days to the number 10 operation, to the number 11 operation, I think show that there's real focus on, more than anything else, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have proper growth in this country, that we increase people's incomes. I mean, wages have gone up a great deal. The minimum wage has been raised, and people generally are better off than they were in terms of their income. But obviously, costs themselves, like the costs of energy, have gone up hugely, and those are very often not things that we can control until, of course, we provide all our own energy by renewables within the UK, which is what we're investing in.
That's contrary to what was in your manifesto, what the big pitch was before the election, which was you'll come into power, you'll put GB Energy in place, and energy bills will be £300 cheaper.
Yeah,
They're
but not the next day.
£187 higher.
Not the next day, Stephen. I mean, it's like by the end of this term,
That's
by the
not
end
what
of
you told the public.
Yeah, no, it is what we told the public. We said absolutely, it's what we told the public. We did not say we're going to lower your bills by £380 next month or next week. It was, that was what our ambition is, and that is still our ambition, is to lower energy bills. But it will be by the end of the time that we've been elected.
That some of the measures that Rachel Reeves has introduced over the last 14 months have been growth killers, not growth creators. I mean, the national insurance rise is the obvious one. We know that that's cost a lot of jobs. We know that that's going to reduce growth rather than increase it. Why would you do that if your mantra is growth, growth, growth?
I think the difficulty is that one of the drags, obviously, is the amount of debt that we've inherited and the cost of that. And we do need to be paying that debt back. So where do we raise the money for that? And that's the challenge. And that'll be the challenge for Rachel when she does her next budget. I'm one of those unhelpful people who have lots of ideas as to the things that
Have you been feeding them in by any chance?
I feed them in. I think we should raise capital gains tax. I think it should be the same level as income tax. I think we should look again at local taxation, because we haven't done that since 1992 or something. And since then, house prices have changed hugely. I don't think that's fair.
Scrap fiscal rules?
Not scrap fiscal rules. I think that we need to keep to fiscal rules. I think that possibly we need to give ourselves a bit longer to pay back debts than we've given ourselves. But we should certainly be making sure that we're going in that direction.
Okay.
But the rich have been getting richer over the last few years, and I think that those with the broadest shoulders should pay more.
George Parker, I've left you to last because you haven't got a political axe to grind. So, I mean, dispassionately, using your FT background, I mean, where do you think we're heading now?
Well, I don't think we're in quite such a dark position as Nicholas was suggesting, the idea that we'll be going cap in hand to the IMF next year.
Some people believe that we will.
Some people do. And actually, funny enough, I was watching exchanges in the House of Lords today, and Ken Clarke, who I've not seen actually for a while, actually made the point. He said he was worried that we're on the edge of something much worse than the government's prepared to admit, and that we could end up going to the IMF. Look, I don't think we're quite there yet. There's obviously a global jitteriness in the markets about the amount of money that all governments are borrowing, including the Americans, but it's worse in the UK, which is obviously a problem for Rachel Reeves.
Well, it's not because the debt's worse, it's because the price of it's worse.
Well,
isn't it? So it costs us twice as much as it does the French, even though the French owe more money.
Yeah,
but that's confidence in the government.
That's because they're in the euro.
Oh, well, come off it.
Yeah, it is.
No,
well, anyway,
honestly, where did you drag that one up from?
Well,
I think what the market.
It's true. It's because if you're going to borrow money, if you're going to have confidence in so you're going to put money into the French economy, and you're thinking, well, actually, they owe a great deal of money, but they're part of a larger system that includes countries such as Germany, and so it's a bigger fish, and so you can have more confidence in it. Whereas Britain stands alone, and our debt is less than the French, but we have to pay at twice the level. We just do.
I think what the markets are markets are worried about, of course.
Hang on, let George.
What the markets are worried about is whether Rachel Reeves can keep borrowing under control, which is why I don't think they're going to relax their borrowing rules, because if they did, the markets would go even more crazy than they have been over the last few months. So I don't think they're going to do that. But what the markets are worried about is you end up in a situation where basically the government is putting up taxes on business, on the City of London, on the wealth creators. And as a consequence, you end up with less growth, and then you exacerbate the fiscal position. And that's why the markets are really keen, I think, for the government to show it's not just putting up taxes to fill the gap, but they're prepared to cut spending as well. And that's where Emily and her colleagues come in, of course, because they refused to support the government when it tried to cut £5 billion from the welfare bill. And that, I think, has really spooked the markets. I'm really worried that this government's lost the ability to make serious cuts in public spending. And as a result, they'll have to keep turning to the tax lever. Pulling the tax lever, growth slows down, and you end up in the kind of loop which ultimately, in a nightmare scenario that Nicholas was pointing out, ends up at the IMF. But I think we're miles from there at the moment.
Ewan says, can you ask George Parker what he thinks about Emily claiming credit for the Bank of England cutting rates? This is not a sign of a strong economy.
Well, no, I mean, that's one of the things that Keir Starmer likes to talk about, that there have been 5 interest rate cuts. Although I think one of the things you have to say is that looking at the state of inflation at the moment, which is much higher in the UK than it is in other G7 countries, the scope for the Bank of England cutting rates further, as quickly as the government hopes, is probably diminishing. And yeah, there is a point that, of course, the Bank of England has cut rates to try to get the economy growing again.
Can't win, really. The Bank of England cuts rates, and I'm told off for claiming credit, and then I'm told, oh no, actually, the Bank of England's not going to cut rates anymore, and that's the
Welcome
government's
to
fault
government,
too.
Emily. I'm sure Thérèse would echo that.
But one thing you have to say is the governments never accept the blame when the interest rates go up, do they? Ever.
Right, on that controversial note, we will move on to a different subject in just a couple of minutes. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
19 minutes past 8 now. Before we come into our next question, Donald Trump has just been asked over in Washington about those claims online over the weekend that he'd died, all because he hadn't been seen in public for a couple of days. This is what he said.
It's sort of crazy, but last week I did numerous news conferences, all successful. They went very well, like this is going very well. And then I didn't do any for 2 days, and they said there must be something wrong with him. Biden wouldn't do them for months. You wouldn't see him. And nobody ever said there was ever anything wrong with him, and we know he wasn't in the greatest of shape. And no, I've been very active, actually, over the weekend. I didn't hear that one. That's pretty serious stuff.
I'm glad it's...
Well, it's fake news. You know, it's just it's so fake. That's why the media has so little credibility. I knew they were saying, like, is he okay? How's he feeling? What's wrong? I said, I just left. And it's also sort of a longer weekend, you know, it's Labor Day weekend. So I would say a lot of people know I was very active this Labor Day. I had heard that, but I didn't hear it to that extent.
Well, there we go. Donald Trump is officially not dead. But let's go to our panel. Emily Thornberry, Thérèse Coffey, Stephen Flynn, George Parker. What does it say about our public discourse and how social media fuels misinformation and conspiracies that so many people were utterly convinced that Trump was dead? Thérèse?
Well, we've had an example in our own country when the Chancellor, obviously receiving difficult news personally, had an emotional interaction, and then all of a sudden the gilt markets move. It is extraordinary how people will start speculating and the impacts that can have. Yeah. I don't know exactly the situation with the president, but Labor Day weekend in the US is a big time of when people, it's their final holiday basically until the equivalent to Remembrance Day. But it's a classic of when people go away. And why shouldn't the president have a bit of time? He went on holiday to Scotland, but he still ended up doing a lot of work when he was there.
He certainly did. Stephen, you didn't encounter the president on his visit to Aberdeen, did you?
I didn't actually, but I made a trip up to Lossiemouth with my kids and didn't realise that Air Force One was coming into Lossiemouth on the same day. So yeah, I was expert planning by me. See, I've got a wee theory. I can see him in the background there. I reckon JD Vance maybe started this. Got himself a little bit overexcited, thinking he could maybe step into the hot seat, start a wee rumour. You never know where it's going to go.
See, that would be a good question to the panel. JD Vance or Donald Trump? Which would you prefer? I'm not going to ask that. George Parker, as somebody who belongs to what's officially called now the mainstream media, does this sort of thing frustrate you, where obviously you're working for a reputable newspaper and yet you kind of have to sort of follow a lot of these mad conspiracy theories up just in case they might be true?
You certainly have to check them out, that's for sure. I mean, I'm not frustrated by it. I think it's actually a massive advantage for traditional media like the Financial Times, which would claim it's a trusted brand, where people can go for reliable news. Actually, the prevalence of fake news, like the one we're just talking about, is actually very helpful if you're a purveyor of what you hope is accurate information. One thing about it, so it looks like, by the way, looking at Donald Trump on the screen there, it looks like he might as well have spent the last few days working on his golf swing and his tan, actually. It's looking especially orange there.
It's a beautiful tan.
It's a beautiful tan.
Biggest tan ever.
The one other thing I say about Donald Trump, watching him doing this press conference, and I was over in the White House with Keir Starmer in February at one of these press conferences. And what's really impressive is that, whether you disagree or agree with Donald Trump, is the way he's able to deal with questions from the media, and he's open to questions from people he's never seen before, and he's prepared to take on all comers. And it's actually, as he just alluded to, actually in this press conference, is something that Joe Biden would never have dreamt of doing.
No. Emily?
I think that the reason that people thought that he was dead was not because he'd stopped working, not because he shouldn't have a holiday, but because he's always in the media. The idea of him just like not tweeting, not being in front of a camera for any time at all is so contrary to the sort of person that he is.
A bit like your good self.
I take holidays, and I'm happy when I do. But he's never. I mean, that's all. That's all. He's just a particular type of character that, just thrives on being in front of cameras, having lots of attention, being able to talk, and for him to stop was, I mean, listen, I wasn't part of the conspiracy. I actually didn't know that he hadn't been on the media for a couple of days, but when I heard that he had, I could see why people might think what's going on.
OK, let's move on to another question from Pat. Given the disaster of Brexit, when does the panel think we will rejoin the EU? Your territory, Emily.
I think we're not going to rejoin the EU with this generation. I think that it's gone. I don't think that we're going to be able to. I'm sad about it. I wish we could, but I think the reality is, if you were to say to people, do you want another 3 years of arguing about Brexit and have a referendum at the end of it? I mean, they would just, head for the hills. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think that possibly the next generation might think that it was worth revisiting, but I think it isn't just a question for us. It's also a question for the Europeans. And, I think that they've moved on. So why would they want to go back into negotiating with the British for the British to then spend all their time arguing about it, to have et cetera, et cetera? I'm afraid not. What we should do, though, is make the best of where we are. And where we are is outside the European Union, but there is no reason why we shouldn't have a close relationship. And that's what the government is fumbling towards. And I support them. And I think they should go further. And I think they should go faster. I think there's much more that we could do, and that we should remain outside the European Union, but be as close as we can. And in a way that reflects the results of the referendum, you know. I mean, 51 voted one way, 49 votes the other. So we leave, but we stay close. That seems to me
52-48, to be fair.
Oh, well, whatever.
I mean,
close.
Okay.
I mean, very close. And so, you know, and because it was on a knife edge, I think that would be the most. I mean, that's the common sense way of proceeding. And you know what? It's what would do best for our economy as well, if we were close, because it's our biggest trading bloc. They're our closest neighbours. They're the ones we should be trading with more than anyone else, and we should be trying to close down as many frictions to trade as possible.
George, do you think it's very surprising that, I mean, if Brexit is such a disaster, that there is no rejoin movement to speak of? I'm sure there is a group out there somewhere that wants to.
Oh, Stephen.
apart from the SNP, who in Westminster politics are relatively irrelevant now.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll come to Stephen in a minute.
Even the Lib Dems aren't actually calling for us to rejoin the EU at the moment. Maybe it's a long-term ambition. I tend to agree with Emily. I don't think we're about to go back in, which is interesting when you look at the opinion polls, how much regret there is around Brexit now. I think the last time I looked, only 35% of people thought that Brexit was a good idea, so it's been a big drop-off. But I agree, it's just been too traumatic. I think it's a generational thing. I don't think we'll be back in anytime soon. And, you know, but there are opportunities opening up for the government in terms, as you were saying, Emily, of rebuilding the relationship. And I thought what was really interesting was back in May when we signed this provisional deal with the European Union about having closer relations and better trading relations, youth mobility schemes and all the rest of it. There was a bit of front page action of the Tories saying it's a betrayal of Brexit and all the rest of it. But what was really telling was that Nigel Farage was on holiday, didn't really engage with it at all. Reform UK have moved on from Brexit. They don't want to talk about it. They know it was a basic...
They found something else to leave since, haven't they? They want to leave the European Court of Human Rights now.
The people don't want to hear about it anymore.
Well, so does several Labour former Home Secretaries, I see, David Blunkett, Jack Straw.
I just think that what is Nigel Farage going to do when we've left everything? I mean, it's like, let's leave this. No, we're going to leave that. No, if we just leave this, then Britain will be, you know, everything that we want it to be.
Stephen Flynn.
Leaving the European Union has been an unmitigated disaster, and the fact that the Labour government refused to, one, accept that and then challenge the architects of that for the failure and then seek to try and get a better relationship with our European partners is why they're in the mess that they are. And we're hearing that the budget's now going to be pushed into November, and we're going to hear a lot between now and then about the tough choices that the government's got to take. Much of the tough choices is deriving from the fact that we have made this catastrophic error. And if Keir Starmer was to come out and challenge Nigel Farage in relation to that, then we would be in a much better place. But they have a poverty of ambition, and thankfully that's not shared in Scotland. And I would contest Emily's point. She might not think that a part of the UK will be in the European Union anytime soon. I would say that Scotland will be, and it will be there as an independent nation. And that's something that I aspire to, and my colleagues back home do as well.
If Brexit has been, to use your word, catastrophic, I mean, I would define catastrophic as meaning that we've literally had millions more people unemployed, that the economy was basically shot to pieces. Now, that hasn't happened. We can argue the toss about, well, would the economy have been a bit better had we stayed in? But surely it's an exaggeration to say that it's been catastrophic.
The hit to, and I'm sure George will correct me in this regard, the OBR have been very clear, the impact of Brexit is greater than the impact of COVID, a pandemic where the entirety of society was shut down for months on end. I think it was a pretty challenging situation, Therese, at the time. You would have been in government. And Brexit had a bigger impact on the economy. I'm sorry, but I don't think there's a stronger phrase I can quite possibly use.
I don't see how that is possible to say when most of our economic indicators, we are roughly in line with most other European countries.
But we are further away from where we should be, and the loss in receipts to the Treasury as a result of that is why the Chancellor's having to scramble about. And look, let's go to Nigel Farage's favourite topic in relation to this at the moment, which is asylum. The Dublin Convention, which we left when we left the European Union, was in place, and that at the time, we had very small numbers of people coming over in small boats. Now we have tens of thousands as a result of the Dublin Convention not being there, directly related to Brexit. So whether it's the economy or whether it's Nigel Farage's latest fancy and his populist rhetoric, it's a consequence of his record. And the Labour Party, and their inability to deal with this big issue because they're terrified of it, is why they are struggling in the polls.
So, Stephen, there's a couple of things. It was 9 years ago since the actual referendum. Undoubtedly, the economy has been affected by COVID, I would say. But that combination, it's open to discussion. The Dublin Convention, David Blunkett was on another radio show earlier today, and he said it didn't ever really work. So building on that, I actually think the government took advantage of not, with the tariff situation with the US, used their freedoms in order to be able to negotiate that. But the EU would have us back tomorrow. There's no doubt about that. But it wouldn't be on the same terms that we were in before. And I actually don't believe the British people would want the new terms at all. So in a way, it's a hypothetical situation. I don't think it'll happen in my generation, in my lifetime, frankly. Perhaps when I'm a lot older, but nevertheless, we've continued to trade around the world. We have opened up routes through CPTPP and different things. And candidly, right now, the crisis of confidence in the country is nothing to do with not being part of the European Union. It is about uncertainty and concerns about whether businesses will keep going.
Emily, you wanted to come back?
I just wanted to come back on the Dublin Convention. So the Dublin Convention was this, right? If you have claimed asylum in another country in Europe and you get refused, if you then went to the UK and claimed asylum, you'd be returned to the country that
That's the theory, but David Blunkett said it didn't work in practice. He was Home Secretary.
But in practice, what would happen then is that people knew that they've had their claim. There was no point coming over to the UK and trying us. But now there is, because now if you claim asylum in Austria and you get refused, you can go. There were people from Epping saying this is exactly what they'd done. They'd claimed asylum in Austria. They'd been refused. They knew that they could claim again in Britain, so they got on a boat and came over to Britain. And when Boris Johnson negotiated the Brexit agreement on Christmas Eve, put those two ideas together, and you know what the deal is going to be like, right? He kind of overlooked the importance of us being in charge of our borders. Okay. And that was supposed to be one of the reasons why we left the European Union in the first place.
Just picking up the point that Stephen was making about the economic hit to the economy, and I agree it's been like a slow puncture in a way. But if you look at what the Office for Budget Responsibility has said, and we can agree or disagree with whether they're right, they said that the British economy would be 4% smaller as a consequence of leaving the European Union.
No, 4% smaller in growth than it otherways might have been.
Otherwise would have been.
Yeah, not smaller.
Sorry, but no, absolutely. 4% smaller than it otherwise would have been, which amounts to a loss of tax revenue to the Treasury of about £40 billion, which incidentally...
Can you remind me the last time the OBR got a forecast right?
Well, they are the official forecasters. Well. Look, all I'm saying, that is the forecast, and £40 billion is the amount that Rachel Reeves put up taxes in that massive budget in the first budget last October.
The Bank of England's also said that public sector productivity, if it was what it was prior to COVID, we'd actually be £90 billion a year better off in terms of available spending. So, there are these things all over the place.
Right, let's get some news headlines at 8:34 with Daryl Jackson.
Britain's long-term borrowing costs have surged to a 27-year high, increasing pressure on the Chancellor ahead of the autumn budget. The higher gilt yields makes it more expensive for the government to borrow from financial markets. A man who shot dead a prison officer in a revenge killing in Lancashire has been jailed for at least 45 years. 35-year-old Elias Morgan killed Lenny Scott as he was leaving a gym in February last year. Floor by floor, work to demolish the Grenfell Tower starts this week. 72 people died in the fire at the block in West London in June 2017. LBC weather turning drier tonight with just a few isolated showers. Heavy rain moving across southern and central areas later. Lows of 6 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:36 on LBC. I have to read this text out, but from Jane, who says, off topic completely, Ian, but no matter what you both say, whether I agree or not, you and Emily have the most beautiful, soothing voices. A joy to listen to. Hope that's not being too shallow. No, I think that's the deepest thing I've heard tonight.
Not at all. Nothing. You just carry on.
So, as you've gathered, Emily Thornberry is on the panel, Thérèse Coffey as well, Stephen Flynn and George Parker. Right, let's go to a call from Michael in Sunderland. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Ian, and the rest of the panel. Thanks for taking my call. Do you think we, in this country, we should have started to introduce a Q&A session like what they do in America? Fair enough, it might interfere with, you can do it on a weekly or monthly basis. It might interfere with Starmer's World Tour that he's been on for the last year, but it would stop all of this fake news. Is another thing that Trump keeps calling. At least the general public would know what's going on.
George Parker, what about that as an idea? Would it work here?
I think it's a really good idea. And in fact, there was this kind of idea at a certain point that the Prime Minister would subject himself or herself to a monthly press conference where they'd be grilled by journalists. And
Tony Blair used to do that, didn't he?
He did. And to be honest, you don't get to the top of British politics without being able to handle questions from the media, frankly. And I think in the case of Keir Starmer, it would be helpful. I mean, public might find it quite boring after a while. Can't imagine it getting massive ratings, but I still think being subject to questioning, showing you can be quick on your feet and talk in a normal way is something I think which he would benefit from. I think the fact that we haven't seen very much of Keir Starmer since the end of the summer holidays is a bit strange, and I think maybe he should do a bit more.
Thérèse Coffey, you were a Deputy Prime Minister. Might you have fancied doing a monthly huddle or press conference like Trump does?
Well, it is unusual that we have weekly PMQs, and Stephen to my left, of course, at the time then had 2 questions every week. Now, he may not think he got much of an answer, but I think the liaison committee does a good job in holding the Prime Minister to account. Of course, the media, I think, would love to have that unfettered scrutiny, but I think it, for what it's worth, in such a short time, I wonder how much actually impact it really would have for a Prime Minister of this country when there's already significant exposure. Donald Trump has taken it to a new level. He's set up his own social media channel in order to broadcast what he wants. So I don't know how much impact it would really have.
Stephen Flynn. Let's just remind ourselves of the question. Should we have a monthly Q&A between the Prime Minister and journalists on live TV like Trump is doing at the moment?
Well, judging by Keir Starmer's social media post yesterday, I'm not sure he'd have time because he's got all staff meetings to attend on a regular basis. But look, on a more important point, I would just prefer if the Prime Minister was getting on with making people's lives a little bit better. The energy bills were coming down, the price of stuff in the shops was coming down, there was more jobs, there was a transformation in the economy in terms of what we're seeking to achieve. And that might sound pretty boring, and we'd all love to see Keir Starmer, maybe not, but like it might be good to see him try and do a Donald Trump-esque thing to try and, I don't know, control the media agenda, which is far beyond something he's able to do at the moment. But in real terms, he's not the person to do that. He's not the quickest on his feet. So just get on with making people's lives better, and then maybe there's more chance they'll vote for you.
Emily.
So I think Prime Minister's questions is pretty unique, and the Prime Minister does have subjects himself to questions every week, and there's not another country in the world that really has that. I think that's really important. And the Prime Minister, in advance of going into Prime Minister's questions, there is a kind of an accountability so that, as I understand it, different government departments have to fess up when it comes to any potential disasters that there may be, and that the Prime Minister might be asked questions about and has to explain to the Prime Minister, well, we've done this, but this is why, and this is how we're going to get out of it. And do you know what I mean? So it gives the Prime Minister a weekly look across the piece as to what government is doing. So that is really important. I think if we wanted to augment that with a monthly press conference, I think it would be a good idea. I think we do need to make sure that the message does get out, and the Prime Minister is the most important message carrier that the government has. So, yeah, I think it would be a good idea. I mean, obviously, he has a great deal to do, but perhaps the most important thing, as important as doing it, is making sure that people know what it is that the government is doing. Because,
George,
when I list sometimes the things that the government are doing, people just go, they just haven't even heard about that. I mean, if you, for example, on asylum seekers and what the government is doing in order to try to stop the small boats, I've got a list of sort of 15, 20 different things that the government has done. And when I start explaining it, people go, really? Have you done that?
Yeah, but it's when you get to saying, and 12thly.
No, but I'm just saying that it's not to a certain extent. I agree with Stephen. I mean, it might not be very exciting, but it is important for the public to know these are the things that the government are doing, and it isn't.
But Blair was brilliant at that, wasn't he? Yeah. I mean, George, you would have attended some of those press conferences. You're old enough to have done so, dare I say?
Indeed.
I mean, did they work?
Yeah, I think they did.
From his point of view?
I think from his point of view they did. I mean, I think in the end you become a bit irritated by it, and there are days when you much rather not be facing the press. I remember when David Kelly died, the government advisor, and Blair had to face the press and was being asked if he had blood on his hands. I mean, there are days when you don't want to be facing the media, but I think it's a good way of engaging the public and sounding a bit more normal. I'd like to ask Emily whether she thinks, I've spoken to a cabinet minister who took this view as well, that the Prime Minister should actually get out there and start talking the country up a bit. And I know there's a danger in doing that. You're turning a blind eye to all the problems. But I think in this situation we're in at the moment, there's a danger of us talking the country into a worse situation that it actually already is in.
Well, they trash-talked the country last year.
And Keir Starmer led the way in it, talking about everything being broken. I agree.
Well, I think it's difficult, though, because you've got a new government. You do have to be clear about what the baseline is. I mean, as I've already said tonight, baseline was highest taxes, public services on their knees, and terrible debt. I mean, it is. People do need to kind of know that before, but we need to then say, and this is the problem, and this is what we're going to do about it, and this is why it's going to work, and this is probably how long it's going to take. But stick with us because we have a plan, and it can get better, and it doesn't have to stay like this. It doesn't have to be like this. We are working on it, and I think. That is
the big
important.
Headline yesterday was actually something initiated under the Conservative government. I mean, this is the reality that stuff has carried on. Of course, Labour's there to make different choices. And that will come. Quite a lot of the things that in the manifesto haven't actually come to fruition yet, and they will. But there is an element of just constantly trashing the past. Does not give any confidence to people. And that's why, candidly, I think we're seeing a lot of people turning to a different party.
Doesn't this all
when they say blame it on the main parties, and as a consequence, we end up with another party becoming the beneficiary.
Doesn't it all depend on who is the leader? I mean, if you've got Nicola Sturgeon, for example, Stephen, doing a weekly press conference, all of the Scottish journalists would want to attend it. If John Swinney did it, I mean, great man though he may be, he is slightly charismatically challenged. You've got to have a charismatic leader to carry this off, haven't you?
I think that's
like yourself.
I think that's deeply unfair on John.
Of course you would say that.
John's a class act and a steady hand at a time when that's what the public want and expect from their politicians. Maybe I'm going to contradict myself a wee bit here by perhaps agreeing with Emily. Maybe it would be a good thing if Keir Starmer did it. It might give the SNP just an even more encouragement in the polls than what we've already had in the last year and a bit.
Okay. Well, it's worth. I thought I was politically interested. I had no idea Tony Blair used to do this.
I think the other thing is that when you talk to Keir Starmer on a one-to-one level, he does he's very thoughtful and it is very interesting, to speak to him. I think sometimes when he's talking about things that he feels passionately about, you can really tell.
It's not going to give you a job.
No, look, I'm not,
Oh no, there's a reshuffle next week, isn't there?
This is what this is, the audition.
Oh, come on, guys.
I don't think Emily needs to audition.
I'm telling you that when you speak to him on a one-to-one level, he's very... And I think if he was to do press conferences and to do them regularly, I think that he would become more himself and be more relaxed, and I think it would be quite effective.
He has actually got a sense of humour, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Which he doesn't show very often. But anyway, let's move on to another question in just a couple of minutes' time. It's 8:46.
LBC.
Apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Emily Thornberry, Thérèse Coffey, Stephen Flynn and George Parker with us answering your calls. Don't forget, if you ever miss an episode of Cross Question, you have the Cross Question podcast, and you can also catch up on the LBC YouTube channel and Global Player as well. Sadia in Manchester, says, are there too many left-wing parties for any of them to be successful in elections? Well, Zach Polanski has won a landslide victory to become the new leader of the Green Party, and he says he'd be happy to work with other left-wing parties, including the new yet-to-be-named party being set up by Jeremy Corbyn and his fellow former Labour MP, Zara Sultana. Rumours that it's going to be called Jezbollah have to be denied, I imagine. Stephen Flynn. What?
Just Iain.
Actually, I shouldn't
what was
say
the
that.
question again?
He's actually on this programme next week, so how did you hear me say that?
Just lost half your listeners there, I think. Are they going to work with other parties?
Well, no. Are there too many left-wing parties for them to be successful?
In a British context, certainly in English and Wales context, are they fighting the same battles, proposing the same arguments? It appears to be the case that Polanski and Corbyn would be very similar. Of course, the Green Party in Scotland has got its own new leadership in the last few days because they're not affiliated in the same way, I don't think. And I guess having more ideas in the mix isn't a bad thing. The guy, Polanski, I've never met him, but he seems to be pretty energetic. He seems to be basing himself around the chap from New York who's been very successful, and Gavin Newsom in California, and the way they communicate. And I guess that's the lesson for all of us and what's happened over the course of the last few days with the leadership contest, is that if you can engage those people who are most likely to believe in your ideas with some exciting, engaging content, then the chances are you're going to do pretty damn well. Gavin Newsom's doing it like in his opposition to Trump at the moment. I'll probably order you some of the merchandise because I think you'd be a fan of it. Make Gavin great again and all the rest of the hats. But there's a serious point in there in that how you communicate with the public has completely changed, and far too many people in politics are fixated on, I hate to say it, speaking to the likes of George and hoping that they're going to get a sidebar or maybe even a front page, when in real terms you can beam yourself into someone's phone, and if you're interesting, engaging and exciting and maybe a little bit controversial as well at points, then the chances are the public are going to like you a little bit more.
It is interesting. I've got obsessed. When I go home on the train, I watch Facebook and Instagram Reels because I'm very sad. I have yet, given what my algorithm must be, I have yet to get any of these Reels from politicians, not a single one.
Really?
It's bizarre. Thérèse?
Well, SNP at one point were the most advanced in dealing with things like Facebook and the like, but in terms of that communication, clearly TikTok has taken on, taken over rather than taken on. So I think my own party were, in effect, religiously opposed to any use of TikTok. I think that's changing potentially. But on your point, I think one of the things that traditionally our political system has actually produced very broad church political parties, and that's been a necessary element of trying to make sure that we try and get as many a high percentage of the population supporting generally policies that are shared by the two main parties. By and large, we probably agree on 70%. We may agree on certain things on how we might achieve it differently, but there's actually not that much of certain things which massively divide us. We want growth, we want to see lower taxes. That's not unique to Labour or Conservative. But nevertheless, I think
you are very similar, yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah.
Well, in wanting to achieve prosperity for the people of the United Kingdom. But there will be differences on how you achieve some of that. So in terms of, are there too many left-wing parties? I'd like to think that's not my issue in terms of being a Conservative politician. But I think it is worrying in a way that we have...
there are too many right-wing parties.
that there are single-issue parties, and that will change the dynamic. And we've seen that already with Keir Starmer getting a huge majority, but with only a third of the vote.
Emily?
Speaking on behalf of the party that is the coalition on the left, and a fairly unique party in the European context. It's unique to have a large left-wing party that is a coalition. In most of, you look at lots of other countries, they have lots and lots of little parties, and that therefore means that the sort of the Christian socialists or whatever they might be called, the centrist right parties are constantly in power. And the great strength of the Labour Party is that we are a coalition. Now, we have a responsibility as a result of being a coalition, which is that we need to have a bit of respect for each other. We need to understand that we are likely to agree on 90% of things, but there may be things we disagree on, and that's fine. And we need to remember that we're a coalition, and if we do that, and if we treat each other with a bit of respect and remember that we're supposed to be out there to fight the Tories and in Scotland to fight the Nats, then and not each other.
But you've kind of shed the left-wing part of that coalition, though, haven't you?
I don't think we have.
Well, you're about to find out that you have, aren't you? Because this new Jeremy Corbyn party is polling 15 to 20%.
Yeah, but I think
that's only going to come from Labour and Green voters.
Yeah. No, I understand that. But I still, I think that the Labour Party is the party on the left, and we should remain there. And we have, and a lot of people, I think, if we said what we mean and meant what we said, then I think that we would be in a much stronger position than we are at the moment.
George?
Well, I think there probably is a danger that the vote on the left splits between the different parties, because you've not just got the Greens and Jeremy Corbyn's new party, whatever it's called, but also to a certain extent the Lib Dems now are fishing for that strand of vote, sort of slightly more pro-Palestinian, anti-Trump, more environmental sort of vote as well. So, it's a crowded space. So I think one of the interesting things that the emergence of a strong, potentially strong left-wing party led by Corbyn and the Greens, Reform on the other side, is whether our voting system in this country, the first past the post voting system, can sustain this kind of politics. I mean, people discuss it all the time, but
the size of opinion polling is going to have to change, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you will not be able to predict individual constituencies with so many. I mean, in Scotland, obviously, one more party than in England.
Yeah, and you can end up in a situation in the next election where you've got a whole load of parties bunching around 20-25%, and that throws up all kinds of very strange results. And it was interesting seeing Zach Polanski saying that he hopes to get at least 30 Green MPs elected at the next election. You can imagine that if those parties are effective in concentrating their vote in urban areas, for example, in the case, I imagine, of the Greens.
Well, hang on, you say that, but I mean, hang on. I mean, if you look at the Green MPs that are in Parliament at the moment, aren't they? Some of them are in sort of, Tory areas where there's a sort of turquoise kind of Greens, and then you have other Greens who are in the cities, and you have a completely different type of profile, just like the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems in the shires are very different to the Lib Dems in the cities. So I think the problem is going to be with this new leader of the Greens is that he's certainly somebody who seems to be on the left of the Greens, and that's fine. That may be where the majority of their membership is, but is that where their votes are?
Yeah.
Their parliamentary success has come from people on the right, just like again with the Nats. There was always the conservative nationalists who voted nationalist, and then there were the left-wing nationalists, and this is a tension that these parties have. So if
you were Zach Polanski tonight, you'd be euphoric because you've won. But I suspect that Jeremy Corbyn is about to shoot his fox, because he's going to come after all of these sort of very left-wing people who've joined the Greens because they've been disillusioned with Labour. I'm not sure that's going to be a good thing. What you will think? You don't? Somebody surely has got to have an opinion on that.
I think Jeremy will hoover up votes. You saw it when he came so close to winning. So close.
Got more votes than Starmer did.
Far more votes than Keir Starmer ever did. Yeah. And there is still that frustration. We're seeing it in a variety of ways, and we're seeing it with, a year in. Labour's got horrific polling ratings.
But Theresa, it goes back to my earlier point about the way in which people are communicating. The reason why Jeremy was successful in managing to secure so many votes is he's authentic. Whether you agree with him or not doesn't really matter, but the public feel like he's authentic, and that's what they want to see with a politician.
Yeah, mean what you see and say. And
you see the guy Polanski,
say.
And he seems to believe the things he's saying, and it looks authentic, and that's exciting for the public. It's a lesson to all of us.
Right. And I think also, even if people don't agree with you, if they think, well, you mean it, And they'll kind of go, well, you're right, Emily, well, I agree with like half of what you're saying, or maybe 70% of what you're saying. The rest of it's rubbish, but, I'll vote for you because actually most of it I agree with.
All right. Let's move on to our fun question from Corinne in Rotherfield in East Sussex. The new Green Party leader used to be an actor. He also denied having offered certain hypnotherapy services when he appeared on this show 6 weeks ago. Which unlikely jobs have you done in the past before your current ones? George?
Well, I spent part of my youth on a farm in Devon, and before I went to school, every morning I had to milk 10 goats. Does that count as interesting? My nickname at school, incidentally, was Smelly. For tragic and obvious reasons.
Well, I had to muck out pigs as a child, so that was far worse.
Even worse.
Emily?
What do they call you?
I'm not going there.
Well, actually, along the same lines, when I was a student, I worked on Townsend Torreston, which was the ferry that was the precursor.
Jackie Smith used to do that.
Yeah, and I did the same job as Jackie Smith. Jackie Smith used to clean out loos. I used to clean out the loos. I used to clean out the loos on the Free Enterprise 3, which was a little boat that went over to Zeebrugge.
I probably went on that.
Yeah, and it wasn't you who threw up in my loos. It was children and women, and it was the most. I remember going one of my worst days. I went in. It was a rough crossing. Every single loo was full of sick. Every single sink was full of sick. Every sick bowl was full of sick. And I was standing there on my broom, thinking, how much are they paying me? And as I'm standing there, a little child goes running towards the sick bowl in through the door and is sick 3 times on the floor.
Lovely.
I locked the door. I closed it up. I went to the next. I left it for the next shift to do.
I remember going
there's enough.
from Harwich to the Hook of Holland on a Townsend Torreston ferry in a force 9 gale.
Yeah.
And I was lying on the floor trying to go to sleep, and someone threw up, and it landed an inch from my head. Thérèse.
Yeah.
I had a job in Liverpool marking Spot the Ball. And I earned more in 4 hours than people else at school did in their entire Saturday jobs. Spot the ball.
She means football.
Football.
In case your mind was going elsewhere.
It's sort of associated with the pools. A little bit of gambling.
You're too young for this, Stephen.
You are speaking about something.
There was a picture. You had to guess where the football was.
Scotland and football doesn't really
picture
go
of
together.
footballers, and then you had to work out on that picture where the ball would have been.
Oh, like it's the sort of thing they had a question in sport and stuff.
Fun for all the family.
Somewhat.
Okay, that sounds
Anyway, Stephen.
I was a checkout boy in Tesco for 4 years. And Iain, that gave me the motivation to check out of the UK with Scotland.
Oh my God. I was about to say, you've done terribly well for yourself since.
I did check out on Tesco before
I won't
barcodes.
say that now. Right, thank you all very much indeed. On tomorrow's panel, we have another former Deputy Prime Minister, this time Labour's Baroness Harriet Harman, along with former Conservative Cabinet Minister Baroness Nicky Morgan, plus the journalists Ash Sarkar and Lionel Barber. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to return to the subject of the Green Party leadership contest because Zach Polanski scored a landslide victory, although so few Green Party members voted. I'm not sure you could call it a landslide.